Welcome, Dr. Carson. Honored to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So I watched with rapt attention the Fox debate the other night, and you had a couple of really good one-liners you dropped in there. A couple zingers that were pretty good. But the one that we won't have today was, Megan, I'm glad you let me talk finally. I didn't know if you're going to get much airtime there, so we won't have that problem. We got 30 minutes here for just you and I to hang out and talk. You know, one of the things that popped into my head when I was thinking about you coming by here is there's this huge groundswell, and it's of varying levels of anger or passion, and it's somewhat, some of it's kind of off the hinge, and some of it's not. Just this anti-Washington rhetoric, and for sure that's part of your appeal. For sure that's happening, and people are just disgusted, and some of them are just generally disgusted. They don't even know why. Others have very specific things that they're just tired of the idiocy out of there, and the fact that you're not one of those folks is playing well for you, isn't it?
Oh, it's playing extraordinarily well. As well it should be, because, this country was designed around the people. The people were supposed to be at the pinnacle, and it was supposed to be of, for, and by the people, with the government there for one purpose only, and that was to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for the people. But what we have observed, we the people, is that whole thing has been turned upside down now. And the government comes along and it dictates. For instance, with the so-called Affordable Care Act, the government comes along and says, this is what we're doing. It really doesn't matter what you people think. If you don't like it, too bad. That really is a fundamental shift in the relationship between the government and the people. And if the people accept that, that's the beginning of a real fundamental change in America.
Yeah. And it's almost, we will surrender that, portions of the population will surrender that proper relationship of we're the boss of you people in Washington rather than you're the boss of us. Like a 4-year-old, you're not the boss of me. We'll almost surrender that if we get what we want out of Washington. It's almost like they're trading their freedom for a handout.
Well, it's a mentality that has infested us in recent decades. It wasn't always like that. In the beginning, first of all, we put a great emphasis on education in this country. When de Tocqueville came to America in 1831 to study us, because the Europeans were flabbergasted. They couldn't understand how a nation barely 50 years old was already competing with them on virtually everything. And as he studied, he came to understand that we really put education on the front line. Anybody finishing the second grade was completely literate. He could find a mountain man. The guy could read the newspaper, could have an intelligent conversation, could tell him how the Constitution worked. Only the aristocracy in Europe could do that. But because we had people who knew how to do things, we were able to move all the way across this country from one sea to the other sea, across the rugged and hostile terrain. And we had people who knew how to build roads and structurally sound bridges and containment facilities and dams, and they knew how to invent things when a problem came up. We had the can-do attitude. And the can-do attitude propelled us from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world in record time. Now we have traded that can-do attitude for the what can you do for me attitude. And, in more than 30 states, you can actually make more money by accepting government subsidies than you can from working a minimum wage job. And a lot of people say, you know what? Why should I work when I can collect this money doing that? Now, in the old days, they would have made a very different choice. They would have said, I'm going to take the minimum wage job because I'm going to learn skills. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to have opportunities to climb the ladder. And I'm going to be much better off than the person getting the subsidies. But that mentality has taken over. And that is one of the things that we're going to have to change. But you're not going to be able to change it by declaration. The way we change that is we stoke up the economic engine once again. This country has the most powerful economic engine the world has ever seen, but it cannot operate because we have entwined it with a gazillion regulations and with a
You're talking to a business guy.
and with a tax system that is absolutely antithetical to entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment. So
again, you're talking to a business guy. I don't want you to talk me into that one. Now, let me expand on that just a second then, because I was thinking, the best news is about Dr. Ben Carson is he's not from Washington. From a practical, tactical, know what to do when you sit in the White House, you're a first-year resident. I mean, you don't have a clue. How are you going to handle that? Because to me, that would be intimidating where I'm trying to do what you're trying to do.
Sure. Well, I certainly know the principles, and I probably know the Constitution much better than most of the people in Washington. But as a doctor, one of the things that I've learned, particularly when we're dealing with very complex situations, is to get a consult. And sometimes you have to get multiple consults. The Bible says, in the multitude of counselors is safety. And that was written by the guy who's supposed to be the wisest man who ever lived. Now, if he recognizes that, certainly I think any of us should recognize that as well. So you surround yourself with the people who know the things that you do not know. But I think wisdom and judgment, quite frankly, I don't want to, no pun intended, but wisdom and judgment trump just knowledge and lifetime experience in politics.
Oh, I'm sitting in the presence of a brain surgeon. So, what is the difference in wisdom and intelligence to you?
Well, wisdom is knowing how to utilize the information effectively versus just knowledge. There are a lot of very knowledgeable people. I say there are a ton of PhDs who are total fools. They can have all this knowledge, but they have no idea what to do with it, or they use it in a very inappropriate way.
So you gather consults. So something like, I'm just thinking as a regular guy, because a couple of years ago you did the famous speech, and it launched you into this limelight and put you on this journey. By the way, did you have any idea, any inkling that when you stood up there and said that stuff that it was going to lead to this?
No, I did not. I mean, I knew God was up to something when I was asked to do it because I had done it in 1997 when President Clinton was in office, and I wasn't aware anyone ever did it twice. And then I found out that one person did it twice, and that was Billy Graham. And I said, Lord, what are you up to here? I just really didn't know.
That's some big shoes right there.
Those some really big shoes.
Wow.
And I didn't really know until the day of the prayer breakfast. That morning when I awakened, I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. I had no idea it was going to have the profound effect that it did. But it was basically voicing what millions of people felt. And I heard from so many people, particularly elderly people, who said, I was just waiting to die. I had given up on America until I heard you speak.
Wow. Now, I got to meet your wife a few minutes ago, Candy. And it is Candy.
Yes,
I get that right? So my old friend Zig Ziglar, who passed away a few years ago, he used to say,
I knew him too.
He used to say, he came up to me about the third time he ever met me. He said, Dave, I don't respect a man that can't marry up, and I deeply respect you.
No question about it. You have total agreement from me.
You outpunted your coverage, brother, without a doubt. Other women in your life that are influential. I've heard you talk about your mom.
Yes.
Sounds like the kind of financial homespun wisdom that I use around here. We used to call it common sense. It's highly marketable now. I make a good living off of it. But what lessons should somebody that is going to be a leader in America take from someone like your mom?
Well, my mother was one of 24 children. She was born right here in Tennessee.
I didn't know that.
Chattanooga.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And managed to get together up to a third grade education before she got married at age 13. And they ended up moving to Detroit. And some years later, she discovered my father was a bigamist. And she was trying to raise us all by herself with a third grade education. But she believed in hard work, and she did not believe in making excuses. And she worked 2 to 3 jobs at a time in her attempt to stay off of welfare. And the reason she wanted to stay off of welfare is because she was observant, and she noticed that when people went on it, they stayed on it. They didn't come off of it.
Mm.
And she occasionally accepted some aid, but for the most part, she was able to stay off of it. And she wouldn't accept excuses from us either. And I think that was probably that was the best thing that she did.
I kind of smell that she might have been pretty tough as a mom.
She was very tough as a mom, but in a neighborhood where there was a lot of failure, she raised a son who was a brain surgeon and one who was a rocket scientist. So, I think that it wasn't a fluke. I think if you took my mother and you put her in almost any home with kids, they would have turned out okay. Mm-hmm. And parental influence is much greater than a lot of people give it credit for. Mm. It's much more important than the environment. And she made us read books, and that was really the key. Even though I didn't want to do it, believe me, I did not want to read those books. But as I started reading about people of accomplishment, I began to understand that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. And that was the key. The other thing about her is that, she saved every penny, every nickel, every dime. She didn't spend anything unnecessarily. And she would drive a car until it would not make a noise. And then she would go in and buy a new car. And neighbors and everybody was always wondering, how is that woman able to buy a new car? She must be selling her body. She must be doing something. But no, she was just being extraordinarily wise and thrifty.
Very frugal, very frugal. That probably is a good segue into, you've put out a tax plan.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, my plan, I make no bones about it, is based on the Bible and the concept of tithing. Because I think God is a pretty fair guy. And he thought it was fair. He didn't say, if you have a bumper crop, you owe me triple tithe. And if your crops fail, you don't owe me anything. So there's something fair about proportionality. You make $10 billion a year, you pay $1 billion. You make $10 a year, you pay $1 billion. You have the same rights and privileges. I don't know how anything could be more fair than that, particularly if you get rid of all the deductions and all the loopholes. Now, there are a lot of people who say it's not fair because the guy who put in $1 billion, he's still got $9 billion left. And that's not fair. We need to take more of his money. Well, of course, that's called socialism. And those systems never work over the long run. What really propelled America to the pinnacle in record time was we took just the opposite tact. We said, that guy put in $1 billion. Let's make the environment even friendlier so that next year he can make $20 billion and put $2 billion in. That's what propelled America to the pinnacle of the world. We declared our independence in 1776. Less than 100 years later, we're the economic power of the world, a position that we maintained, incidentally, until last year when China took over.
They passed us on that. Interesting. So a 10% flat tax?
Well, it would have to be somewhere between 10 and 15% if you eliminate all the deductions in order to just maintain where we are now. I would want to get actually in a better situation than we are now. So the other thing that has to be done is the size of the government has to be reduced significantly. There's a lot of stuff that we're doing that doesn't make any sense. We have a Department of Veterans Affairs. We don't need a Department of Veterans Affairs. Veterans Affairs should be folded in under the Department of Defense. And it should be smooth transition. And we need to be looking at the way we take care of soldiers. 14% down recruitment for our volunteer army right now. Why? Because they're looking at what we're doing to our veterans. When a person applies for the military, they should be in a support system immediately from day one, particularly when they go through combat, because that's when all the trauma is occurring. And we should have people in place a year before their time of discharge to be working on their integration back into society. There shouldn't be a period of unemployment when they come out of the military. And they should have a health savings account, which allows them to go to any medical facility in the country, and we should be delighted to take care of them. And we should use the VA facilities for specialized care for traumatic brain injury, limb replacements, and research.
How do you get through the morass that has called Congress to get anything done up there?
Well, the big problem with Congress right now, we've sent a lot of good people to Congress in the last few elections. And the reason that nothing has changed is because we don't have aggressive leadership. What it's going to require, I believe, and I've talked to some Congress people about this, and they agree with me, is strong leadership from the White House. If we get strong leadership from the White House, a lot of people who are kind of very timid right now will stand up. But if they stand up right now without strong leadership, they just get smacked back down.
Interesting. So, what do you do with Obamacare then?
Well, we're going to get rid of it, but you can't get rid of it without having a replacement. And the replacement would be health savings accounts that work extremely well everywhere they're utilized. And you look at the people in Singapore, how happy they are. They pay a quarter of what we pay for health care. But I would change it to a health savings account over which you have complete control, like you have control over your savings account, not one that has 6 bureaucrats in it. And you pay for it with the same dollars that we pay for traditional health care with, except we wouldn't have to use as many of them. And you give people flexibility so that if you were $500 short for a minor procedure, your wife could give it to you out of hers, or your daughter, or your uncle, or your cousin, your grandfather. It makes every family essentially their own insurance company with no middleman. Gives you enormous flexibility to cover almost anything that comes up. And it also makes every family concerned about each other. If Uncle Joe is smoking like a chimney, everybody's going to be hiding his cigarettes. It's a good thing. It also makes the cost of catastrophic insurance drop dramatically, because the only thing that's coming out of your catastrophic policy is real catastrophic events. How often do they occur? Not very often. It's just like having a homeowner's policy with a big deductible versus a homeowner's policy where you want every scratch covered. Two very different animals. And if you allow it to be bought across state lines, introduce that free market aspect, you're going to drive the cost down even further. It makes it very affordable for 3/4 of the people, not so much for the indigent. What do you do for them? Well, we take care of them now with Medicaid. $400 to $500 billion is the annual Medicaid budget. How many people?
I'm gonna interrupt you so that I can say thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
I apologize. I know you've got another appointment that's more important, but thank you.
Absolutely.
I can sit and talk to you all day. I'm honored to have you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Dr. Ben Carson.